folks, Captain Mikey here, out in the Florida Everglades. It's a beautiful day out here, but we are dealing with some pretty adverse conditions right now. Lake Okeechobee, our mother lake, is over 17 feet high with water levels right now. They're opening up the locks, they're pumping billions and billions of gallons of water out here into the Florida Everglades. And what's that creating for us is really high water levels, coupled up with strong currents, and today I've got a bunch of wind on there. Now this doesn't mean we can't catch fish. This just means we're gonna have to work a little bit harder for that. So I'm gonna take a few moments, I'm gonna create a little video out here today on one of my favorite finesse techniques, and that's rubber worm fishing. Now rubber worm fishing has gotta be one of the most primitive, basic ways of bass fishing there is. In a world of bass fishing where you've got hundreds of thousands of options between lures and techniques and styles, what rod to use, what line to use, you need to slow it down. And that's exactly what we're gonna have to do out here to be able to get a successful bite today. Now, the fish out here are gonna be here, but they're gonna be buried. They've got so much water that they're gonna be spread out. They've got way more room to spread out and explore other options. And they're gonna be tucked deep back in things. So they're not chasing the lures. And trust me, I am a reaction fisherman. I'm a power fisherman. I love casting crankbaits, spinner baits, swimming jigs, anything along those lines where I can really move fast, cover a lot of water, and really figure out exactly how I'm gonna hone in on those fish. Well, today, that's not gonna work. And it's just not happening out here, unfortunately. So we're gonna slow it down. I'm gonna go over my top 3 favorite methods of fishing a rubber worm, what worms to use, what size to use, and how to actually fish each one of these techniques I'm gonna show you out here. The techniques I'm gonna work on today are, of course, the Wacky rig, one of my favorites. It's definitely an oddball way to fish. It's one of those great methods that there's no way to fish it wrong. It's absolutely wrong the way it's hooked up in the first place. So but I will go over a couple methods that will probably optimize your chance at getting good bites out of there. And then of course we're gonna go over the shaky head. The shaky head jig, that's a fantastic method. You can cover a lot of water with it. You can really slow down with it. It's a great presentation, and it provided a lot of big bites for me over the years. And of course, the classic, and probably the most versatile of all the methods we're going to use today is the Texas rig. The Texas rig not only works for your rubber worms, it works for any soft plastics out there. Whether you're fishing a fluke or a swim jig, of course the worms, you name it. Any style of plastic jig, creature baits, you name it, a Texas rig is always a go-to. You can pitch it back into the heavy grass. You can push it through the lily pads. You can cover deep water. You can swim it across. There's so many different methods that are successful with that Texas rig, and it's a very, not only versatile, it's a very easy method to use. So before I actually get out there and show you how to fish some of these, let's show you how to rig the baits, how to rig each different method here. I'll do it very basic. A lot of the problem that I find with bass fishermen in general, especially out here, is there is far too many options out here. What colors do I use? Well, let's just tone it down. Let's make it really basic out here. We're only going to go over a few different colors. We're only going to go with a few different worms. These are very versatile. The size range varies on the conditions, of course. The colors vary on the conditions, of course. But with the conditions that we're looking at out here today, and I just really want to slow things down. I want to make sure that you really see what's going on out here, and when you get out there on your next trip out, maybe some of these tips will really help you land some bigger numbers, some bigger bass. So stay tuned, folks. I'm gonna get the gear ready. I'm gonna go over each method one at a time, and maybe we'll even get lucky, catch a few good fish today. Alright guys, so one of the first methods I'm going to go over here is the Wacky rig. The Wacky rig, I don't know who invented this. I don't know where they came up with it. It is an oddball method. It's a very easy method to fish no matter what you're doing out there. And it's consistently produced large numbers of fish all around the world, in every body of water. It really doesn't matter where you're fishing, if it's stained water, if it's clear water, shallow, in the wet, in the grass, over rocks. It really doesn't matter. This method is extremely easy to use. Anybody can do it. And as I said, because it just seems to be rigged wrong in the first place, there's really no wrong way to fish this. But I am going to go over a couple different things as to how I like to fish wacky rigs and things that have worked well for me in the past. First thing you want to know is your gear. What kind of rod are you going to use this on? A wacky rig is not a heavy rig no matter what. You're using typical worms like a Senko style worm, but really any flat-tailed worm, any kind of worm that doesn't have a lot of action on its own is going to work most effectively with the wacky rig. One thing I highly recommend though is your line. Always use a fluorocarbon line when you're talking with wacky rigs. Fluorocarbon line has zero stretch. It's a stronger line than your monofilaments out there, and it tends to sink in the water. A monofilament has so much stretch on it, you may miss those short bites out there, and it's going to try to keep that worm up there a little bit. One thing, any worm fishing, no matter what you're doing, is you're really going to want to make sure that you're getting to the bottom. This is a finesse style of fishing. This is not a moving fast. This is not swimming your baits through the water columns. This is really slowing it down, getting it on the bottom, and letting the worm do the work. Do what it's supposed to do out there. So what I like to use, spinning rods work perfect for this. I prefer a bait caster myself, and I've strung this one up. It's not a very strong one. I've got 12-pound fluorocarbon on this one. And that's all you really need. Here in the Everglades, I do deal with a lot of heavy cover, no matter what you're doing, whether it's in the middle of the canal or it's off to the edge. And a lot of times you're going to have to pull those bass out of that cover when they do finally take your lure. So I recommend a fluorocarbon. Anywhere from a 12 to a 15-pound should cover you nice and easily. A bait casting reel, it for me gives it a little bit more control than the spin casting, especially when I'm dealing with winds like I'm dealing with today. The heavier fluorocarbon and the bait caster is going to help keep that down there a little bit better. So what is a wacky rig? Well, a wacky rig is simply just a hook, and you're rigging that hook through that worm right through the middle of it. And I hope you can see this. I'm using just about a 2-aught here. This is a Trocar heavy wire, really strong hook. It's got a bit of a curve to it, if you can see that out there. That does help the worm itself undulate a little bit. And simply, what you're going to do with a wacky rig is you're going to rig it right through the middle of the worm. I like to use Senkos, any Senko style. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Gambler makes a great one, the Fat Ace. That's a killer lure. I've nailed some large bass on this one here. I'm dealing with stained water out here, of course, as you typically are in the Everglades. So I want to go with some colors that are going to stand out a little bit more. The Gambler Fat Ace Junebug color has always been a heavy producer for me here. And of course, you can never go wrong with any of the pumpkins or the watermelons, of course. Any of the green pumpkins, try to get one with a little bit of a fleck in it. This particular one on these Yum Dingers is a green pumpkin neon. It's got a bit of a gold and a red flake inside of there. That's going to give it a little bit more of an attraction to it. That's for sure. All right. And anytime you want to just simply tie your hook on to your line here. I love a Palomar knot. It's simple, it's easy. If you don't know how to do that, any kind of a cinch knot's really going to work. And I'm going to show you two different methods on rigging a wacky worm here. The first method is just the simple basic style. I'm going to take one of these Yum Dingers here. Open that up. Yum Dinger is a Senko style of worm here. As you see, it's got one flat end on it, and then it's got one end that comes more to a tapered point. There's not a lot of action to this worm typically. You can fish these any style. Texas rigging, it works awesome on these as well. But to use a wacky rig properly, this is definitely the style you're going to want to start with. And simply a very basic, simple wacky rig is just hooking that hook right through the middle, somewhere in the center there, right along that, and that's it. That's a wacky rig. I know it looks odd, but there's so much action that goes on when you cast this lure out. As it's sitting there and it's sinking down, it's undulating, it's flopping around. by centering that hook out there, it creates actions on both sides. So when this lure is sinking down, it's popping, it's flying, it's doing all sorts of action out there. Now, a lot of guys will want to put a weight on there. They'll use a jig head, maybe a weedless jig head. Today, I think that's probably a method I'm going to utilize a little better because I am dealing with currents and winds. If you're in really calm, still water, a little bit of weight actually helps out a lot too. Because what that weight's going to do is going to pull that down. It's going to allow this worm to actually create that flapping action the whole time. As it's sinking, it's going to be moving around quite a bit more than it would be normally out there. Again, this is a very finesse style of fishing here. It creates a lot of bites. Now, the problem I have with this rig here, and which is why I don't typically do it, it does work very effectively. However, by just sticking the hook through the worm, just like so here or whatever, you tend to go through a lot of worms. Especially as a charter fisherman out here. I got clients on board that maybe know what they're doing, maybe don't know what they're doing or whatever, but you get a lot of the small bites on here, and it can really easily pull that hook right through that worm. So one other really simple and easy method that we're doing, you're going to unhook that there, is a method with the rubber bands. And you can go ahead and get something like this. This is called a Wacky tool. And as you can see on the end of the Wacky tool, it has all these rubber bands on it. And these bands you're going to center basically right on top in the center of that lure. Alright? Simply, very easily, take your worm and you're going to stick it right in the end. It's got a hollow end there. Stick it right in here, about halfway, so half of it's sticking out. I've already got one of the rubber bands pulled to the side, and you're going to slide this band down. By sliding the band down, it's going to push it right on top of that lure, right on top of that worm, right, just like so. Now what that's going to do is create an extra point for your hook set to go in there. Now when you do set your hook in there, grab this here, you're going to put your hook, feed your hook through a bit of the worm and also underneath that rubber band. By doing that, we're going to stick it through, pop it out the other side here, and just like that. You can see it's basically still got the same action that it had before. However, with that rubber band there, it makes it very hard for any fish to pull that off. Now you can go through maybe 5, 6, 7 fish on that same worm rather than maybe losing a worm every other fish along those lines. There is a problem with this method though. Your hook ratio is not always the greatest, unfortunately. When you see that now, okay, so one more time, just again, that's the Wacky rig. And with the Wacky rig, it is a very finesse style of fishing. You don't need to do a lot to it. A little pop in here, a little twitch here and there is going to create a little bit more, but you're essentially going to drag it across the bottom. You're going to pull it up a little bit, let it drop again. Pull it up, let it drop, and let that worm do the action. You don't need to spend hours in one spot out there. Toss it out, give it a couple pops, let it twitch around. If nothing's hit it, reel it back in, cast it to the next spot. After I show the other two methods that I've got here today, I'm going to show you how to fish it. And hopefully we'll actually catch some. This is my odds-on favorite of what we're going to catch the bass on today. All right, guys, let's move on to the next one. After the Wacky rig, my next favorite method of worm fishing is probably going to be a shaky head. A shaky head. What's a shaky head? Shaky head is a jig head. It's a specifically designed jig head that has an offset hook built right into it. Or by an offset hook, that creates this into more of a weedless style here. And this is a shaky head jig right here. They come in a variety of sizes and shapes. You don't need to go too heavy with this, folks. Alright, really no heavier than a ½ ounce. That would be the heaviest I would go. I would honestly probably go with 3/16, maybe 1/4, and that's about it. As you can see by the style of the jig head itself, it does have the offset hook here, which is gonna, with the keeper, that's gonna allow you to rig this weedless. But where the eye of the jig head comes out makes this lure kind of stand up. Alright, so that worm is going to undulate, it's going to hang up, it's going to float up a little bit more as you're able to skip it across, bounce it across, and shake it across the bottom there. Now, what kind of worm to use with the shaky head? Anyone. It really doesn't matter. It's a great finesse method, no matter what you're looking at there. I would typically go with something in the bigger profile or longer profile, we should say, probably like a 7 to 8 inch worm on there. I really like the paddle tails, the flat tails, the cut tails, things like that. Zoom, one of my favorite worms out there, but there's millions of them, guys. Charlie's worms, Bassmaster, Bass Pro Shops makes their own style. Everybody makes them, but you don't have to spend a fortune on other. There are I'm not going to name any names, but there are some Japanese companies that spend a lot of money in marketing, and they make a fantastic product. Do not get me wrong on that, but you don't necessarily need to go and spend that kind of money out there. A typical bag of worms is probably going to cost you $5 or so, and that's it. You don't need to go much more. Today with the Shaky Head, I'm going to go with the Zoom. This is, I believe, an 8 inch worm here. It's just a finesse style worm. It's got a little bit of a bulbous end to it, but no paddle tails, no curly tails, nothing like that. And you're going to rig this just like the offset hook is going to want to set. Grab your worm. You'll notice this one's got a flat bottom on it, so that's going to be the bottom. You're going to want that to be the bottom a little bit more. All right, so you're going to want your hook to come back in through the bottom of that line there. So grab your hook, feed it right through the center of it, and you don't want to go down too far, maybe about a 1/4 inch at the most, really just to where the bend starts. You want to try to even it out to the same length as that keeper there. All right, poke it back through and feed your worm on through. Let's see if I got it right this time. Okay, and I probably put a little bit too much. But the key, perfect. The key is you're going to want to rig this bait straight. You don't want a kink in it. You don't want it twirled to the side. You don't want anything like that, because that's going to actually create a lot of line twists for you on your lines out there. Just another way, and it doesn't make the right presentation that the worm itself should have. One easy way to make sure that you are rigging it up right, as long as you got the keeper side on there properly up there, just kind of see where that hook's going to go through. Pinch it, got it, and then pinch the whole lure forward a little bit, putting your hook in right where you set. Try to make sure that it's nice and centered no matter what you do. Okay, and now we see we got a nice straight line with the lure here. I've got the hook point sitting out. One thing I really like to do, and especially in the heavy covers that I do fish here in the Everglades, is skin hook this. And by what that is you just give it a little extra pinch there, and you bury the tip of that hook just inside of that. All right, and now it's rigged completely weedless, but there's not a lot of tension on there, so when that bass does bite, it's easy enough for that hook set to pop out and grab them right in the lip, just as you want it to do there. And that's it. That's a Shaky Head. Now I'm going to go over the methods of fishing a Shaky Head very shortly, but that's an excellent rig right there. Got a green pumpkin with a metallic flake in there. This should be a really nice lure, especially on the conditions that I'm dealing with today out there. So the Shaky Head, we'll try that. Now again, I'm using a fluorocarbon line with the Shaky Heads here. This is actually a 10-pound fluorocarbon on that I've got rigged on this, and I'm going to run it on a spinning rod. All right, my spinning reel out there with a 10-pound fluorocarbon using a 7-foot rod, but it's going to have a real fast action to it. By that, it means it's a soft tip. Of course, this is an ugly stick, one of my favorite rods out there, and it's going to have that real sensitive tip to it. You're going to want that when you're bouncing that jig along the bottom, when you're making it skip and pop and shaking it. Now, again, Shaky Head does not mean that you're going to want to sit there and shake the thing the whole time. That's not exactly what you need to do. The worm's going to have enough action on it. That's just the name that they call it out there. You're going to shake it a little bit, but as my father always said, shake it more than twice you're playing. You got it. Alright folks, so I showed you a Wacky rig. We showed you a Shaky Head. The next rig I'm going to show you is the Texas rig. The Texas rig has got to be the most widely used rigging method for any soft plastic there is. The Carolina rig has its place, don't get me wrong folks, but time after time, when the going gets tough, or when you just don't know what to do, throw a Texas rig with the creature bait on it, with the swim bait on it, with the worm on it. It really doesn't matter. It's an excellent method. It's very versatile. You can cover lots of water in anything, whether it's heavy cover, no cover, clear water, stained water, rocks, you name it. A Texas rig is going to get you through it. It's weedless. You can easily adjust what weights you want on it, or you can do it without the weights. Let me show you what a Texas rig is first. And I'm sure most of you already know this, but maybe a lot of you don't actually understand how to properly fish a Texas rig. And that's probably what's going on here. So here it is. This is a Texas rig. That's all there is to it, folks. What you're looking at, actually, technically, if you really want to get technical about it, technically, that's a Texas rig. All it is an offset hook, whether it's a worm hook or, you know, with a straight shank, or it's got the offset curved shank like this, whatever, and tied on. You're going to rig any kind of soft bait you got weedlessly. That's a Texas rig. More commonly, that's what you're looking at. This is just a sliding weight. I like to go with the tungsten weight no matter what. Definitely tungsten. It's a little more environmentally conscious out there. It's definitely a better product than your standard lead weights. It doesn't hurt the environment whatsoever, but it's a more durable line, and usually the holes are a little cleaner. Some of these lead baits that you get or whatever, they don't have clean holes. You end up with little frays in your line whether you know it or not out there. And that weight can be adjustable. Typically, guys, just to give you an easy little tip, you don't need much more than a 1/4 ounce, maybe 3/8 ounce. That's pretty much going to cover most of the waters that you're going to fish out there. If you really want to get out there, you can go all the way up to, you know, 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces, anything like that. You know, typically I'm only going to use a real heavy weight like that if I'm punching through mats, things like that. But just covering a bit of water, trying to locate those fish, trying to find those fish, a 1/4 ounce to 3/8 ounce, that's about it. Sometimes I'll even go later on that. Right here I've got a 1/4 ounce weight. And because we're talking worms today, we're not talking creature baits, we're not talking crawfish, we're not talking swim baits or anything. That's another show, don't worry, we'll have plenty of those. We're going to talk about worms. What kind of worms would you actually like to work on a Texas rig? Any of them. That's it. Now remember, the Texas rig does not give any action to the lure itself, to the worm itself out there. So I would prefer to use a worm that has some kind of an action itself. A bit of a curly tail, a paddle tail, something that's going to move along those lines. You can go all the way down to the small finesse worms in the 4 or 5 inch range, but you can really go all the way up to those 10, 12 inches, especially in the summertime for those big bass out there. I like to throw about a 10-inch worm on there is one of my more common baits. Today, because we are dealing with a lot of different pressures out here, a lot of adverse conditions, I think I'm going to tone it down a little bit, but just show you a typical idea here of what kind of worm I like to work on a Texas rig. This is a 10-inch. It's got a nice curly tail. It's going to have a lot of action, and what you're going to be doing is dragging this bait along the bottom, making it pop just a little bit, picking it up, letting it drop, but that tail's going to be undulating, that tail's going to be spiraling, it's going to be doing all the action and the work to it, so as well as the action of the worm. So you're kind of covering a lot of different bases when you've got a multi-diversible bait just like that. Again, this is for the Texas rig. Today it's a little bit rough out here, so and the bite is pretty hard, so I'm probably not going to go with anything just so big. I'm probably going to tone it down a little bit and go with this 6-inch worm. A 6-inch worm, but the same action with the curly tail. Again, with the water conditions that I'm dealing with here today, I want something that's going to blend in but stand out, if you know what I'm saying, out there. So a little 6-inch worm like this, it's got a little paddle tail on it, but that's curly tail. It's kind of a June bug, purple and black color there. It's gonna create a lot of motion in the water as I'm dragging it through, and that weight that slides up and down, at times it'll slide down, allowing your worm to float up, and other times it's gonna, as you're dragging it, it's gonna be right there digging that worm down into it. So this is good. This is a very effective method. It's got to be the most common thing. If I think back to when I was a little child, my very first bass had to have come on a worm very similar to this, and I would have rigged it almost identical to this. A lot of guys will peg that weight so it'll stay stuck there in that same spot. Again, with what I'm dealing with, I like to have it be able to move a little bit. As you cast it out, it's going to take the worm with it, and as it sinks down, the weight will sink first, bringing the worm down behind it. Again, just like the shaky head or any other offset hook, you've got the keeper section here. So what you're going to want to do is start with that hook tip right in the very center of the bait. Again, don't push it down too far, maybe a 1/4 inch, just to where the bend of the hook just starts, and poke it through the bottom. Feed it right through, twist it around, and what I like to do with a Texas rig in particular is I like to bury that knot. Bury the entire eye of the hook, the knot, everything right in there. It gives it a little bit more protection out there, but with this weight clanging around here, it's a little bit less to get caught up on some weeds and anything else that could be down there. Okay, and as we do that, go ahead, find out where your hook's gonna poke through here, mark it with your fingers, give it a little bend, and poke it on through. Again, the most important thing to any kind of worm fishing and offset hook fishing here is to make sure you've got a nice straight line there, like I do here. Okay, you don't want any kinks, you don't want any twists, you don't want any bumps and humps in your worm, because that's going to create a whole lot of line twist. Just like so. So there it is. That's your Texas rig. And again, you can see how attractive that lure does look out there already. It's going to have a lot of action in the water as we move it along. Just going to fix that up a little bit. As we move it along, we're going to drag it across the bottom. We're going to make it pop. We're going to make it dance. But we're hopefully going to get a big bite. All right, folks. Those are our 3 methods that we're going to try today. Texas rig, wacky rig, and shaky head. Let's hopefully we can catch a few bites out there and show you guys what we're really talking about. All right, guys. So we went through all the hard stuff. We taught you how to rig everything up. That was for the fun time. Let's go try to see if we can catch some fish. Let me show you how to fish each one of these methods that we have here. First of all, we're going to start off with the wacky rig. Wacky rig has got to be one of the most versatile ways to be out there. It's so easy to use, guys. As I said, you really cannot do anything wrong with this one. I did add, as you can see, I added a little bit of weight over here. That weight hopefully is just going to help it bring it down. Well, I actually like the weight. I prefer to have weight on there if I'm able to do it, rather than just just the naked worm itself. That weight helps it to, when it falls, it undulates more. It does more of that flapping action. That's what you're really going to need. It creates more vibration. It attracts more fish, essentially. Really easy to use, guys. What we're going to do, we're just going to throw it out there. We're going to throw it out there. We're going to let it sit. One of the biggest things that I see, the biggest mistake everybody making out here is they're fishing way too fast. You're swimming worms. These are worms. They're imitating snakes, worms, crayfish, things that live on the bottom, that go across the bottom. So you want to keep it on the bottom the most you can. You're going to hit little structures out there, of course. There might be a stump, or there might be some laydown, there might be some rocks, whatever it would be or whatever, but you'll feel that. There is one downfall to a wacky rig, though, of course. It's not very weedless. The way I have it rigged up here, of course, the worm's going to help a little bit, but it's not a weedless lure, so you want to be careful. This is more of a sight fishing pinpoint kind of thing. Don't just cast it out into the middle of all the junk out there. You're definitely going to get yourself caught up, and it's going to make for a long day. All right, so here we go with a wacky rig. I'm just going to reel it up. Again, I'm using the bait caster. A spinning rod is probably what most people use on this. I like the bait caster. I just like the control of it. I do have a medium action rod on here. Again, this is 12-pound fluorocarbon. That's going to help that lure sink, the worm sink a little bit there. And the medium action rod with a fast tip. It's got enough strength to pull anything out that I have to, but it's sensitive enough to be able to actually feel all those tiny little strikes that you may get off of a wacky rig like this. So we're just going to go ahead, cast it on out there, and let it sink. One very important thing is always, always, always keep your eyes on that line. Majority of your strikes are going to happen on that fall. As that lure is sinking, it's wiggling, it's jiggling, it's creating lots of vibration and action. Once you see your line completely slack, go ahead and reel it up so it's tight. That is the only reeling you're doing on the presentation like this. All right? You are not moving the lure with the reel. You're going to move your worm and everything with the rod itself. All right? So we got a tight line, and go ahead and pick it up. Just drag that worm along. That's it. Pick it up, drop it down, reel in your slack. always keep an eye on that line, making sure something's not grabbed onto it, and you'll feel that as you pull it up. Now, one thing important, this is a precision method of fishing, fairly anyway. So when you're casting to a spot that you believe is an active spot, try to keep your worm in that spot as long as you possibly can. If you're moving it along with your rod, and you move your rod 6 feet, you just moved your lure 6 feet. All right, so and it's probably going to be out of that optimal strike zone now. But again, this is it. That's it. Slightly pull it up, slightly drag it across, and let it sink back down. Let it do what the worm's supposed to do. Go ahead and reel it up. Again, you don't want to focus too much on leaving that lure in that same spot for too long. If you haven't gotten a bite within the first 2 or 3 drags that you've done there, there's probably not a fish there. Go ahead and move on. Find yourself another spot. Cast it out. Let it sink. Watch onto that line the whole time, looking for any little pops, any little bumps, any runs, any indication that a fish has a hold of that. Again, drag it along with the rod, reeling up your slack nice and slowly. This is finesse fishing, folks. We're not out here trying to create a new song and dance, a new method here. Finesse, nice and slow. When you're dealing with conditions like I'm dealing with out here currently, you can't go fast. You go fast, you're blowing right by them. Again, it's not that the fish aren't here, it's just that we're going to have to work a little bit harder to get ourselves into those fish. Pull it up. And as we're doing this, we're dragging it along the bottom. We're not really lifting it up too much off the bottom, maybe a little bit, but we're really dragging it along, letting it do its own thing, and you're feeling what's down there the whole time. Whether you got a whole bunch of weeds on the bottom, whether you got a rocky bottom, you might have a couple stumps of trees buried down there. You're really feeling for what's down there the whole time, as well as feeling for that bite. Now again, when conditions are like the way they are right now, you're not going to hit that slammed bite. They're not going to attack this thing. They're not going to grab it and run and pull the rod out of your hand. It's going to be more of a suck. They're going to suck it right up and start trying to swim away with it. And so you don't want, when you do get that bite, you don't want to jerk that rod right out too hard. You don't need to power set these hooks on these things. Again, very simply, just dragging that lure along, letting it drop. Watch that line that whole time, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you, I can't stress that enough. How many times you don't even realize a fish was there. And a lot of times, especially when they're as picky as they are right now, you're not going to get that second shot on that fish. Right, so really watch it, drag it along, let it drop, and that's it. You're wacky rigging. That's all there is to it. Try the shaky jig. Now, shaky jig has a very similar approach to it. The shaky head jig is going to be a little bit slower, a little bit faster actually, a little faster action on that. But again, you're really just keeping it on the bottom. You might make it dance a little bit, but you just want to let it drag along that bottom, shaking it every once in a while, popping it, letting it sit. Again, the way the action of this lure is going to react is it's going to sit up like so, and it's going to have that tail undulating and rising up in the water column. That's the way. You're going to bounce that across the bottom like that, and that's the most successful way you're going to fish one of these. A lot of jig fishermen, especially from the north, where you might be fishing for your pickerels or your walleyes, depending on what country you're from, however, they like to keep that jig moving, and you're really swimming it, but you're swimming jigs. We are right now crawling worms. Don't go ahead and swim it. Don't do it. Go ahead and cast it out. Again, when you're using a spinning reel, one tip, here's a nice tip for you folks, always close the bail by hand. Don't close that bail by reeling it in up there. It just creates that one split second where you might miss something that's going on. Create the bail by hand, your hand's right there, you're ready to go, but you're still focusing on what's going on with that line. It's just a method that I've been taught over the years, and I see everybody doing it wrong. All right. Again, the shaky head's on the bottom. I'm dragging it. That's it. Reeling up the slack. Drag it, maybe give it a little shake, a little pop. Reel up that slack. Pop it, drag it. Keep making sure it's staying on the bottom. Because again, that's where they're going to be right now. That's what these lures are designed for. There are swimming worms, don't get me wrong, and they're designed to swim. This is not. None of these methods are designed to be swimming right now. So we just want to keep it towards the bottom. Always keep paying attention to what's going on. Finesse fishing for worms is just that. It's finesse. It's doing it finesse style. You got to always be concentrating on what's going on, paying attention to what's going on the end of that line at all times out there. It's not like reeling in a crankbait where you're just doing a straight in reel. You can look around, observe what's going on, watch the eagle soaring above, watch the alligator splashing over on this side. You're going to feel that amazing hit. You're not always going to feel that hit so strongly when you're finesse fishing like that. So you really got to be focused on what's going on out there. If you cast your lure out and then just start paying attention to everything else, everywhere else out there, you're really going to miss out on what's going on out there. So again, casting it out, letting it sit, it's down on the bottom again. You know that because your line stopped moving. Give it a little drag, no tension, no fish. Okay, reel in that slack again, give it a little drag, and pop it a little bit. Reel up that slack, give it a drag, pop it a little bit. Okay, this is creating a whole lot of action down below. It's staying in that optimal strike zone up on the bottom, and it's really imitating all those bottom creatures that these bass are actually sitting on right now. Very similar methods to what you would use with a wacky rig, but a little bit faster. This is the proper way to fish a worm. All right, whether it's a shaky head, whether it's a wacky rig, whether it's a Texas rig, or even just a naked worm, it really doesn't matter. It's a slow approach. That's all there is to it. Sure, if you're swimming it across, you might get the odd one here and there, but that's optimized to make sure you get the big bite. That's not the way to do it whatsoever. I'm going to show you on this cast here. I'm actually going to cast it. I'm going to do it wrong for you guys. All right, and I'm going to show you. Pay attention to what I'm doing. And this is the way I will honestly see 90% of my clients doing it. All right, especially on a spinning reel. They're going ahead, and it's a constant reel. They're moving that line, moving that lure with that, and just popping the hook. Popping it along, spinning, popping it along, spinning. And really what that's doing, you might think occasionally you're going to touch the bottom, but you're really not. You're swimming that lure, and that's not the way it's supposed to do. You're not going to get any action on that. Of course, if I got a strike right now, I'd feel like a complete fool, but I've been doing this long enough, folks. I know what I'm talking about. Trust me, if you want to listen to me, I'll make sure you catch a lot more fish. Again, just dance it across the top. A lot of guys will pick their rod up. All right, by picking your rod up, if you go slow enough, you are dragging it on the bottom still, but you're really making it pop off the bottom too. All right, and if you're going too fast, it's definitely coming right off the bottom, and you're not giving it that chance to go right back down to the bottom. So again, just kind of pop it along, let it sink. Reel up that slack. Pop it along, let it sink, reel up the slack. That's it. Shaky head is a fantastic way to fish. I really enjoy using the shaky head. I've had some massive fish caught off of a shaky head. Don't fall under the assumption, folks, that just because you're finesse fishing, you're going to catch small fish. No, not even close. Yeah, you may get some of the smaller ones that won't hit a giant swim jig, or it won't hit a really large swimming bait, or anything like that. But you're also going to get the big ones. The big ones are just as finicky right now as the small ones. And that's it. Maybe even more so. They're sitting back there. They're not even worried about where their next meal's coming from. They got it. They're fine. Alright, so that's a shaky head, guys. Let's go ahead and switch up this lure. And let's show you this Texas rig. Now again, no surprises here. It's not going to be incredibly different. We're not gonna be fishing faster. or much faster. We're not going to be moving along too much more. We're really going to be dragging that lure along the bottom, same as everything else. I have decided to switch it up. I do have a 10-inch worm on here now. This 10-inch worm's got a curly tail to it. It's going to have a lot of action, and that's what you need when you're Texas rig fishing. All right. Again, paddle tail worms and no-tail worms, any of those things, they're going to work out just fine because the worm itself's got a lot of action. But when it's really slow and you're trying to keep that bait right in that strike zone a lot, it helps to have a little bit of extra action out there. And that's what that curly tail is going to do. As I'm dragging this lure along, the curly tail spinning, the worm's flopping up and down. It's creating lots of action, lots of vibration, and should draw lots of attention out there. Alright guys, so one more time with the Texas rig, as opposed to the Wacky rig and the Shaky head jig, you want to give it a little more action. This one you're going to move a little faster. You're still going to keep it on the bottom. You're still going to drag it along, pop it, twitch it, and it's still going to be a slow finesse approach no matter what. But the worm has more action. Let's give it more action. And that's exactly what Texas rig does. It gives you that capability of being able to do a heck of a lot more with it, but still keeping it in that strike zone at the same time. So again, we're going to cast her out. We're just going to close that bail with it, let it sink down, watching that line the whole time, making sure we know exactly what's going on, down to the bottom, and we're going to jig it along. Jig it along the bottom, give it a couple twitches, a couple pops, let it sit, let it rest, drag it, let it rest, reel up that slack, go ahead and pop it up and down, give it a couple hops, let it move it around. Because you got a curly tail, especially on this worm here, you want to let that tail move. The lure does have to be moving somewhat to get that tail to create its own action there. But it's still that slow finesse approach. We're still going along. We're just popping it a heck of a lot more. We're still dragging it near the bottom. And hopefully that triggers a lot more strikes. Again, the Texas rig is just such a fantastic tool for any soft plastic baits. Whether you're flipping jigs with it, whether you're tossing creature baits, whether you're doing swim baits, and of course crawling worms. Either which way, any which way, Texas rig is a fantastic tool that you have in your arsenal. And it's, as I said, it's my go-to. It's everybody's go-to. When you're first rig you're thinking of hooking up when you're going with plastic lures, especially worms, is always going to be a Texas rig. If you can't. All right, folks. Hopefully you learned a little something. Some of these tips and tricks are going to help you out on your next trip out on your own home lakes or your home bodies of water, lead to more bites, more fish, and just a better day altogether. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget, check out my other videos. Stop by, check me out on Facebook, Sawgrass Fishing Charters, here in the beautiful Florida Everglades. I'm out of Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. It's not just the Everglades, folks. The urban fishing, the canals, the ponds, all around here. Peacock bass, snakeheads, largemouth bass, and a whole variety of other panfish. It's just fantastic down here. The fishery is what dreams are made of. And we know we can help you out. Stop by and see me. Come check me out. SawgrassFishingCharters.com. For now, though, folks, Captain Mikey checking out on you. The future is bright. Keep those lines tight.